Hello everyone, and welcome back to my What If the Constructicons were in Transformers Prime. Now, without further ado, let's get right to it. Now, we open up right after the last part episode where we met the new team of Autobots. They then introduced themselves: Wedge, Heavy Load, Hightower, Lifter, and Grid. Optimus introduces himself. So does Bulkhead,
RC, and Ratchet. Meanwhile, Bumblebee just gives them a nod.
Jack, Miko, and Raph also introduced themselves. Yeah, it goes on for a while. The new team of Autobots getting used to their new surroundings and everything. That's where Bumblebee then goes off, walking into the base, attempting to make contact with Megatron. And that's where Raph is walking by and says, "B, what are you doing?" And Bumblebee's like, in his beep, "I need some air. Where's the exit?" And then Raph is like, "What? What are you talking about?" And Bumblebee then says, "Never mind, I'll find it." That's where Bumblebee walks past him. Then Raph immediately runs out towards Optimus, then informs him of everything he saw with Bumblebee. And let's just say that RC, Jack, Bulkhead, Miko took out the new recruits to teach them some Earth rules. So the only ones left back at base were Optimus, Ratchet, Bumblebee, and Raph. Optimus and Ratchet are then looking at each other. That's when Bumblebee walks in and beeps, "Hey guys, what's going on?" Ratchet then says, "Nothing much. We're just talking about that time we arrived on Earth. Remember?"
Bumblebee then says, "Yeah, that was pretty awesome."
Ratchet then says, "Yeah, and why won't you tell us all about the time you were scanning your vehicle mode?" Bumblebee then says, "Alright, I was under a bridge, surrounded by dead vehicles. Then, I looked up, and there you go. I saw my vehicle mode. I scanned it, then met up with you. Right?" Then Ratchet and Optimus look at each other. Optimus then says, "No, you met up with me." Then Bumblebee's eyes open wide. Ratchet and Optimus then block both his ways out. Ratchet then says, "Yeah, the Decepticons weren't on Earth then." That's when Bumblebee grabs Raph and runs towards the ground bridge. Then Makeshift speaks, "Let me go, or I'll crush him into powder." That's when the rest of the Autobots return. With Makeshift distracted, Optimus runs up and grabs Raph, and then all the Autobots surround him. Ratchet then tells everybody what's going on. Bulkhead and RC surround him, but the new recruits are a little confused, but they also join in. Ratchet, Miko, and Jack all back away. Optimus then says, "Decepticon, tell us, where is Bumblebee?" Makeshift then says, "He's dead prime." All the Autobots are pretty shocked, but Optimus doesn't fall for it. He goes towards Makeshift, grabs him, puts restraints on him, and pins him down, and tells Ratchet to activate the ground bridge to Decepticon base. Ratchet then activates the ground bridge. He takes Bulkhead, RC with him, and leaves the new recruits with Ratchet to guard Makeshift. The new recruits are pretty willing to go, but then Optimus says, "You have no fighting experience. Stay here and guard the prisoner." And then Optimus, Bulkhead, and RC roll out. And they'd ground bridge into a part in Decepticon base that's not that heavily filled with cons and that secure. So they make their move that way. But I'd say Soundwave does detect the unauthorized ground bridge, and then the alarms just go ringing around the base. That's where Bumblebee then wakes up in his restraints. And let's just say, in a similar way, Wheeljack escaped in canon, Bumblebee escapes somewhat the same way. Megatron sees through the camera feed that the Autobot has escaped and orders the Constructicons to go in and apprehend him. The Constructicons just say, "Yes, Lord Megatron." Then they transform and roll out. Meanwhile, in the base, the Autobots are shooting through quite a lot of Vehicons. That's when the Constructicons show up in their path. Optimus then says, "Hand over Bumblebee, Constructicons." Scrapper then says, "In your dreams, Prime." They start fighting. That's where they see Bumblebee running out towards them. Remember, Bumblebee is still without his T-Cog, so he just has to resort to fist fighting. But that's where Megatron, Knockout, Breakdown, Soundwave, and many more Vehicons show up, and the battle turns more to the Decepticons' side, with the Autobots sort of getting surrounded. That's where Megatron laughs and says to Prime, "This is your rescue mission?" And that's where the new recruits show up. The Decepticons are taken aback, even the Constructicons. And that's where Wedge says, "Let our friends go, Decepticreeps." Megatron then laughs. "New recruits, Prime. How did you get them?" Scrapper then scans them. "They're made from our DNA." Megatron then says, "Come join us, Decepticons." Heavy Load then says, "We've heard a lot about you, Megatron. We're not gonna get into your lies." Hightower then says, "Yeah, we're Autobots." Lifter then says, "We would never betray the ones who brought us into this world." Grid then says, "We are Autobots, not Decepticons." Wedge then says, "You can refer to us as the Build Team." The Build Team then rushes in. The Constructicons block their passage to Megatron. Then they rush in. Both the Build Team and the Constructicons start fighting one another. And that's where the Autobots gain the upper hand on Megatron, Soundwave, Knockout, and Breakdown. The Build Team holds their own maybe for a minute until the Constructicons have decided that they had enough. They then combine into Devastator. The Build Team witnessed this, and they're like, "What in the world?" And that's where Devastator says, "Come on, rookies. I thought you wanted a fight." Optimus then tells Ratchet to activate the ground bridge at the preset coordinates, and orders the Build Team to fall back. They're no match for Devastator. Bumblebee, Bulkhead, and RC start running that way. The Build Team then follows soon behind, realizing they can't handle Devastator. I could imagine a little scene with all the Autobots running, then Devastator chasing them in the background. The Build Team are the first through the ground bridge. The other Autobots kind of stay back to push away Devastator from the ground bridge so, he doesn't follow them through. And this is where, in the Autobot base, the Build Team thinks of a really quick plan. Working together, they grab a ton of spare metals and wires, and Ratchet's like, "What are you doing?" That's where they build a grenade. And Ratchet is taken aback like this. A grenade made out of spare parts? Hightower then says, "There's no time, Doctor." They then put it on the makeshift's back, still disguised as Bumblebee. Lifter then really quick says, "Wait." Then he drills in, takes makeshift's T-Cog out, and hands it to Ratchet. "Okay, we're good." Ratchet then contacts Optimus and the Autobots to disengage and fall back. Optimus then says, "Devastator will follow us through." Then Wedge says, "Just trust us, Optimus." Bumblebee then runs through the ground bridge. Bulkhead, RC, and Optimus transform. They also drive into the ground bridge. That's when Megatron shows up and commands Devastator to follow them. But something gets thrown out onto Devastator. Megatron notices for a blip second as Makeshift, disguised as Bumblebee. And then the bomb, including Makeshift, explode. The explosion then forcing Devastator to discombine back into the Constructicons. And Megatron is like, "Gah!" Meanwhile, back at Autobot base, we see Ratchet put Makeshift's T-Cog into Bumblebee. Bumblebee gets happy and then opens his door. Him and Raph drive out of the base to go for a drive. And that's where Optimus commends the Build Team on their bravery in battle. Optimus sees great potential in the Build Team, but he tells them, "You will need much more training in order to go toe-to-toe with the Constructicons and Devastator again." The Build Team then salute, smile, and look at each other. And that's where Operation Bumblebee ends. It's a trilogy here. Now we get to the episode Loose Cannons, where it's just a normal day at base. The Autobots pick up Agent Fowler's signal that two bots are duking it out. The usual Optimus, Bulkhead, RC, Bumblebee move in, help Wheeljack. That whole scene goes the same. Dreadwing retreats. They bring Wheeljack back to base. Wheeljack looks at the build team. Who are these guys? Then Ratchet says they're clones made from the Constructicons. That's when Wheeljack is like, whoa. The Constructicons? Here? Bulkhead then says, yeah. But recently, they've demonstrated the ability to combine. Wheeljack's done like, huh, like the Combaticons? Bulkhead says, exactly like the Combaticons. That's where the rest of the episode goes the same until the ending, where Optimus approaches Wheeljack that he plays a better role on Community than he otherwise let on. Wheeljack's like, whoa, let's not jump the gun. Come on, Jackie, if you leave, you'll probably just wind up coming right back again. And all that wasted fuel. And Energon is in short supply. Wheeljack then looks at the build team. Then at Bulkhead. Well, if I stay, I get to duke out the Constructicons' new combiner mode. Wheeljack then looks to Optimus. Then they shake hands. Bulkhead says, no offense to the Jackhammer, you'll need an Earth-based vehicle mode. And then that ending all goes the same. The episode Crossfire goes exactly the same way. But since Starscream is dead, let's just say the build team is scouting out that Energon mine where Megatron is fighting the Insecticon. Let's just say Wedge wants to act first, but his teammates are like, no, we gotta contact base. So they contact the base. The Autobots respond and say to stay put. But that's when Wedge goes in and his teammates are like, no, they follow him. Wedge rushes at Megatron running and then hits him in the back, knocking him forward down. And then that's when the Insecticon grabs Wedge and throws him into the rocks. The build team run in, and that is when Arachnid webs up the build team. She commands the Insecticon to finish off Megatron while she deals with these rookies. Wedge gets back up, tries to rush at Arachnid, but Arachnid, using her reflexes, jumps up and webs him too. We then see the scene where Megatron kills the Insecticon. Megatron then turns and sees the Arachnid. Arachnid looks at Megatron. They have eye contact for a little while. But that's when the Autobots arrive. RC rushes at Arachnid and they go off to have their fight. And Optimus, Bulkhead, and Wheeljack confront Megatron. Wedge uses his rollers on his arms to free himself, then frees the build team. They all then surround Megatron. The whole part happens where Megatron collapses, In this timeline, Dreadwing, a couple of Vehicons, and the Constructicons show up and surround all the Autobots. That whole scene goes pretty much the same way. Dreadwing and Megatron retreat, the Vehicons die off, and I guess the Constructicons, seeing Megatron and Dreadwing retreat, they retreat as well. Meanwhile, up with Arachnid and RC, Arachnid webs up RC, but Bumblebee saves RC by punching Arachnid in the back, and then Arachnid just digs out away. Not too long after, the rest of Team Prime show up, and they all return to base. Back at the base, Wedge tells Optimus that he's sorry for engaging the cons, and for not waiting for backup. Optimus then smiles, but you showed immense bravery, from what your team has told me, which is why I am appointing you, Wedge, the leader of the build team. All of the Autobots then compliment him on his rank up. Meanwhile, back at Decepticon base, Megatron promotes Dreadwing as his second in command, and Scrapper as his third in command. And that's where I'm gonna leave it off here, everybody. Hopefully you guys enjoyed part 4, and see you guys in part 5.